Hello and welcome to Head, an Open Dialogists production. I'm very, very happy today that I've got one of my old MEP colleagues and a gentleman with I've had a lot of interesting debates and discussions with over the years, and we're going to just talk about a lot of things. We're going to try and whistle in a lot of things in this next hour. So I'd like to first of all welcome Patrick O'Flynn. Welcome to the show, Patrick.
Thank you very much, Bill. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure, mate, and thank you for coming on. It's good of you to do so. I think we're going to be in for an interesting hour here, so let's dive on in there. And I think, as I like to do with these programs, is before we get really into talking about the issues of the day and things like that, get a bit of a feeling for the person and where they come from, what their views are, and how their careers develop. So, can we do a little bit with yourself and see sort of start with the beginnings in the newspaper trade and how you got into that?
Yeah, well, I left university and then I did this, what was grandly called in those days, I think it was a postgraduate diploma in newspaper journalism, and that was at City University. Because while I was at university, I did a bit of sports reporting, bit of a man after your heart there, Bill. But with me, it was Cambridge United and various other things, and I enjoyed that. I had various mates who were going off to work in the city, but foolishly, I decided I didn't want to do that. And so newspaper journalism it was. And I started off on the Hull Daily Mail back in the summer of 1989, my first newspaper.
Oh, well, back in 1989, what was I doing then? I think I was at Wolverhampton Polytechnic then, trying to figure out how to work computers and failing very, very badly. So back in '89, a sports-based journalist on that publication, and so how did it develop from there to become the political guy that you are today, and that we know you are from the Express?
Well, I actually, it was my university newspaper stuff was sports, but when I started on the Hull Daily Mail, that was a general news reporter. And then I sort of became more of an investigative guy, did some court reporting. I would say I went up to Hull. I still had certain, you probably think I do, but then I will admit I still had certain sort of elements of fashionable liberalism about me.
Perish the thought.
As Godfrey Bloom once called me, Pinko Patrick. But what really tilted me to the right on the issue of law and order was doing the magistrates' court reporting for the Hull Daily Mail. And I went in there, having read all these Paul Foot kind of wrongful conviction books. And after a couple of mornings at Hull Mags Court, the scales fell from my eyes. And I realized that almost everyone was guilty. And the real scandal was the ones who got off with it. That's probably been my guiding star on law and order issues ever since.
Well, that's something we can certainly agree on, I think. Yeah, I mean, I think it'll develop as the hour goes along that we have one or two divergences of opinion, but the big ones we absolutely agree on. So moving on from there, I think most people you'll have come to real prominence with the Express and sort of masterminding their leave the EU campaigning stance and so on and so forth. I think it'd be really interesting to learn a little bit more about that and how that came about.
Yeah, so I went from the Hull Daily Mail to the Birmingham Post, and then I became the Birmingham Post political editor down in London, and then I was the Sunday Express deputy political editor, switched to the Daily Express, went through the ranks there, political editor, and then chief political commentator. And it was really in the wake of the Lisbon Treaty being railroaded through without the referendum that they all promised us. And I was actually campaigning on Daily Express. We had a campaign to abolish inheritance tax. And one of the people we worked with on that was Matthew Elliott, then of the Taxpayers Alliance. And I remember going in to see him at the end of that campaign, where we'd been quite effective because the Tories had at least promised a massive increase in the threshold of inheritance tax to, I think it was going to be £1 million, which is something that never happened because of the coalition, I guess. But nonetheless, that had gone very well. And then we talked about the EU when I went in to see him. And I said to Matthew Elliott, of course, the one referendum that the pro-EUers think they can win is in versus out. So that's why I suggested Nick Clegg had dumped the Lib Dem pledge to have a referendum on Lisbon, and suddenly popped up and said what we need is a real referendum in v out. And I said to Matthew, that's surely because it's the one referendum that the pro-Brussels side thinks it could win. And he said to me, I'm not sure about that. I've done some polling, I've dug around a bit, and if the arguments were framed right, I think we could win it. So I took that away, and it stayed with me for a couple of years. And then with the run up to the 2010 election, Gordon Brown, managed to get out of Downing Street and Cameron in as Prime Minister. But at the time, there was more and more bad news coming out of Europe. There was bailouts for Southern Europe because of the euro crisis, and we were going to be on the tab for a lot of money. And I just sort of suddenly thought, there's this massive democratic deficit. Even the economic arguments for EU membership are weakening. And I just sort of felt it in the air, really, that Daily Express readers weren't just, quote, Eurosceptic. They were outright rejectionist, and they wanted their sovereignty back, their country back. And I thought, well, let's have a bit of mischief here. Let's go for it. Let's see what reaction we get. And that's how we lit our blue touch paper anyway.
Yeah, and the reaction was formidable, wasn't it? I think it really maybe even surprised yourself just how popular it was.
Yeah, it was massive. It was massive, and hundreds of thousands of people signing our coupons. We produced a special edition at the start of January 2011, which kind of sold out up and down the land. And we'd really tapped into something. And at the time, being a Eurosceptic newspaper was about sniffing away about the euro or contributions or whatever. But we'd taken it to another level, and the Sun and the Daily Mail, the Telegraph were quite nervous about it, but you could tell they were intrigued, and we kind of normalised that, I think. And we also succeeded in opening up UKIP to a much wider potential audience, because we were covering Nigel. UKIP people obviously came to the fore in our campaign, and we kind of made it among a certain section of the middle class, quote, respectable to support UKIP, whereas the Tories and Labour always had a sort of dirty alliance against UKIP. The Tories, because they didn't want to lose voters, and Labour for ideological reasons. So I think we helped smash through that. And as you and I will both agree, it really was the UKIP effect. Initially, almost exclusively, the Tories were losing votes to UKIP. The by-election results were terrible. Cameron was staring down the barrel of an election defeat in 2015, unless he gave ground on the referendum. So I think, UKIP, Daily Express, we can give ourselves a bit of a pat on the back for that.
Yeah, I think you sort of took the anti-EU commentary away from the bananas kind of thing and into something more serious, because we'd all got used to that narrative, hadn't we? And, sort of having a little bit of a laugh about it, but taking it onto a more important level where people start to understand the damage that it was doing on many levels was very, very important to do. And you touch upon the effect of UKIP. So it brings us nicely along, really, because I remember, I'm not sure how long after you'd arrived on the scene or whether or not this was your unveiling, but I was at an event hosted by Neil and Christine Hamilton in their garden. It was a garden party fundraiser, and you turned up there and gave a speech. And I think I remember Nigel slightly chastising you for telling funnier jokes than him during the speech.
That would have been a one-off.
Well, I think he sort of said that. But what was the transition that went on there from being campaigning journalist to becoming the actual face of it and the politician?
Well, I think it was during 2011. People go on now about how the Tories are full of Brexiteers, but in those early campaigning days, the whole Westminster Better Off Out group, Commons and Lords combined, was about a dozen people. There are a few peers like Malcolm Pearson. In the Commons, it was Carswell and Reckless and Philip Davis and I suppose Bone and Hollowbone. That literally was about it. So if we were looking around for voices to feature in our campaign and to push things on and make new arguments, UKIP became a bigger and bigger part of that, and UKIP invited me to speak. I think it was at the 2011 party conference, and I went along there, and I was kind of blown away at getting a standing ovation before I'd even opened my mouth, which is not something I was used to from the hard-bitten newspaper industry and its morning conferences. And seeing hundreds of people who had fought for many years, but earlier than I had, who were so grateful to have a national newspaper come on board, and it was a real like morale boosting moment. I felt very humbled, and that's when I began to think, this is becoming bigger and bigger for me. And yes, I can have an impact on the Daily Express, but I would like really to have the handcuffs off and be able to devote my entire professional attention to this cause.
Yeah, I think actually that conference was when I made my first UKIP conference speech as well, much lower down the bill. I was the I think the comedic warm up act talking about political correctness and cracking jokes. But yeah, I think that was
I think you and I both kind of went up the bill sometimes and down the bill at other times, depending on whether we were in favour or not.
I went off the bill for many a year. Too high a risk, I think. Quite right too. I agree with that decision. So yeah, you came on board at that point and got involved quite heavily. And I do recall seeing you out there campaigning on the streets at the by-elections and so on and so forth. You weren't one of those guys who we all know happens in certain organisations. They come in somewhere near the top and stay there, just sort of casting out their wisdom. You many times were out knocking doors at the same time as me. I think we were even on the same leafleting teams. How was that experience for you? Coming from what you've been doing to going straight out there, pavement politics, and meeting the people face to face.
I enjoyed it mostly when it wasn't raining, and I learned pretty early on to carry a wooden spatula. So when you were putting leaflet through a door, you folded it over the spatula and pushed it through. And a couple of near run-ins with angry Alsatians taught me that. And then apart from that, it's great fun, isn't it? It kind of sometimes the feet hurt a little bit, and then normally into a pub for a beer or two afterwards, and it was great camaraderie. And again, you can't help but be humbled by the commitment of the voluntary members of UKIP at that stage. And they were never going to give up, and they've been through some very thin times. And, we all remember, was it Michael Howard talking about cranks and gadflies, and then Cameron disgracefully saying fruitcakes, loonies and closet racists. They were getting dogs abuse all the time. So it was an honour to stand alongside them, And I certainly wanted to be in a position, which I think not everyone has been, who's been in senior ranks of UKIP, not wanting the first UKIP leaflet I put through anyone's door to be one designed to get me elected, but I put a few leaflets through a few doors asking to get other people elected for the party. There's one or two people I think who ended up very high up in UKIP, who perhaps the first UKIP leaflet they put through the door had their own faces on it, which not proper in my view.
No, well, there's one or two ended up quite high up who never put a leaflet for anyone through the door, but that's another story. Yeah, I mean, I certainly remember those campaigning days. You say the feet were sore, and you mentioned going to the pub afterwards. My main thing was the head was sore most of those campaigning sessions, because we worked hard and played hard, which was as it should be.
Yeah.
As it should be. And then we accumulate all this, and we get to 2014. Where you and I are amongst the new tranche of MEPs elected, and we, the battle really is raging at that point to push the Conservatives into doing the right thing on a referendum and so on. And that's where a lot of your prominence came to the fore. I do recall that you were the man who would often be giving out the messages that needed to be pushed at elections and so on, more into strategy as well as being the front of things. Those meetings of the campaign teams that you were an integral part of, they've certainly always intrigued me, and I think a lot of the activists as well. Can you give us a little insight into that? Were you directly running, or what was the input from other people? How did those campaign meetings work?
Well, I suppose that there were two big campaigns, weren't there? There was the 2014 European parliamentary campaign, where I started as communications director for the party as well as lead candidate in the East. And then I think Neil Hamilton fell out quite badly with Paul Sykes. with the result that he sort of exited as campaign director, and I was given that role as well, and Nigel sort of spun it. It was a more of a kind of media phase of the campaign, and that's why the change had been made. So it was full on, very early starts, and it was about, I suppose it was quite a small team at Brooks Mews. Every morning we would come up with kind of hopefully a diary of the day for the candidates and what were the issues that had been raised on the media. My overwhelming kind of strategy in that election was quite small c conservative. The polls were good for us. We just had to make sure we didn't screw it up. So, you know, I was at the more risk averse. And I suppose the things that people remember of that campaign or the pre-campaign there were Nigel's debates with Nick Clegg, 2 televised debates, both of which went very well. He sort of won the first one on points and then absolutely took the fella apart in the second debate. And, you know, that was a great moment. I'm not sure Clegg and the Lib Dems have ever really recovered from that moment, albeit it's a few years ago now. So it was really, you know, what a trendy sociologist might call it, an immersive experience. It was like doing a tour of duty on the submarine, to be honest, and then coming back to civilian life briefly to set up as an MEP, and then we were into the general election campaign just under a year later, which again, I think looking back, that's actually the campaign I'm proudest of, because, you know, we weren't just talking about the European Parliament. It wasn't a free protest vote. The nation faced what at the time was seen as a very close election between the 2 big parties. It could have gone either way, Cameron or Miliband. And yet we managed to hold a vote share of 13-14%. I think in England it was 14%, rock solid all the way through that campaign. And we connected on loads of issues, from the immigration system to law and order. You know, we managed to dump our previous problems with being seen as anti-NHS, and we were coming up with common sense pro-NHS policies, very strong on forces, veterans, you know, the whole Believe in Britain motto, which has been adopted by various Tories at various points since. And I think we had a good team of people, a core team, about 8 or 10 people who have got very good on television, taken seriously on all the big debates. So I think if you've seen since then, since the 2015 elections, the squeeze that smaller parties have been subjected to, that was actually a remarkable performance by us. And it turned out in that election, you know, unlike in 2014 European election, I think we'd taken nearly all our votes off the Tories. By then, the immigration issue and various other what you might call culture war issues had really started to bite in working class communities. And I think it was because of us and our vote holding up that people like Ed Balls lost their seats to Tories. So again, I think we were instrumental in landing the Conservatives with this wafer-thin majority, which meant they couldn't use their coalition partners, the Lib Dems, to veto this idea of the referendum. So I think the cards fell nicely, and we can all be very proud of that election result too.
Well, I certainly felt that, because I was standing in Dudley North in that election, and I think ended up with about 25% of the vote. But actually, up until about a week beforehand, the polling had been showing, not our private polling, because I wasn't aware of that, but the national polling that was being done was showing in Dudley North we were neck and neck with Labour. But then we unfortunately fell away. Because I think that the SNP our bogeyman argument bit quite hard into our vote there. But most of the votes that we were picking up in that area were council estates, traditional blue collar, what you would expect Labour to be, and you know it held up really well considering the amount of pressure we were under to do that there. Well, I know, so I think I can concur with your analysis that it was a really very strong working class vote that we were bringing in.
Yeah.
One of the incidents that was it around that time of that election where you pulled Nigel out of the James O'Brien interview, or was it?
that was before. That was during the European election campaign.
That's a famous moment.
It was a famous moment, and the thing about that was that both me and Alex, who was my deputy at the time, had told Nigel not to, he'd had this bid from James O'Brien to go on and debate him, and we both said don't do it, and we both left the bids that it kept coming in from James O'Brien in our in tray, and they weren't ever being picked up. So as far as we were concerned, we blocked it because no good would come of this thing. And then, unbeknownst to us, Nigel, while being driven around in his Range Rover, they used to listen to LBC, him and his security guys. And every morning, James O'Brien would mention the fact that Nigel Farage was running scared and wouldn't come on. And then it was the day of it. I didn't know it was going to happen. And I'd set up Nigel this interview with the Sunday Times political editor, and we had a nice line to go on, and it was all going to be great. And he said, oh, we just need to stop off first. But what's this? And it's Leicester Square and going into the HQ of LBC. What on earth is this? And when time was running short and we had a certain appointment to keep with the Sunday Times, much more conducive and important. But anyway, Nigel sort of just decided to do it without telling us, went in there. And, you know, the guy O'Brien had done his homework, obviously, and he fired at Nigel the 12 worst things that anyone in UKIP had ever done or said, in quick succession. It was probably like facing an over of Michael Holding and an over of Andy Roberts straight after each other, 12 bouncers. And the reason I eventually went in was because we had a deal with LBC that it was for a certain number of minutes, like 8 minutes, and we had to get off to this thing, and it had gone for 15 minutes. And I probably shouldn't have gone in, to be honest. But, you know, did it do us any harm in the end? Not really, but yeah, it was a moment when the guy who's the press Svengali, you know, I regretted becoming a bit of the story. But actually, and this tells you what Nigel really thought, he didn't bollock me much, and he did confess a couple of days later, I probably shouldn't have done that, but it was my pride was telling me I can't keep ducking this man.
That's the closest anyone will ever get to an apology.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I must admit, it is one of my favourite moments. It's a real thick of it moment. I very much picture as the Malcolm Tucker there, diving in, pulling out. I did enjoy it, although, you know, in a perverse sense, I did enjoy the moment. But then, obviously, we've spoken about big campaigns, and that election campaign, obviously, 2015 was a proud moment for all of us, I think, and we were on the verge of achieving something truly unprecedented. And I often look back on it and think, if only, but I don't think there's anything more we could have done. But what we did achieve was, with the pressure, was the referendum.
Yeah.
And then, you know, there's a few stories to tell on the referendum and how we went forward. And obviously you were heavily involved in much of what went on with the referendum planning as well. So, you know, could you give us a little bit of an insight into that? Because I'm sure people will be absolutely fascinated. I mean, this is the pivotal moment in British history, and you were right at the centre of it. So, you know, it's pretty interesting to hear a few inside anecdotes.
Yeah, well, my position was awkward because, you know, I'd been campaigning on the Daily Express and had come into UKIP again to further the same aim, to get Britain out of the EU. But I suppose I wasn't, you know, deep sort of blood UKIP man and boy as some other people were. And so when we got to the referendum campaign and it was who was going to be the designated campaign, you know, my background as a sort of political commentator from an analytic standpoint, it told me that the official campaign needed to be the one that had Conservative cabinet ministers coming on board, because, you know, UKIP could mobilise the working class base and up turnout in the seaside towns and the old mining towns, you know. But in order to get close to winning, you know, we would need this sort of middle class, conservative minded, but slightly lily-livered, quote, respectable vote. And that would respond to, you know, not quite so much stuff about, you know, immigration, but maybe other arguments about sovereignty and democracy and cost. And, you know, Matthew Elliott and Dominic Cummings had won a referendum on regional government for the North East for the No campaign there. They've been instrumental in the anti-alternative vote referendum and had won there. So they had a track record. Vote Leave was very snooty, which I regretted, towards UKIP and Nigel. But it was, for me, it was head over heart that the perfect blend was going to be Vote Leave for the main campaign, and UKIP, Aaron Banks, Grassroots Out, Leave.eu as a sort of secondary campaign. I even made a speech about that I think it was to the Bruges group, the autumn before the referendum, so autumn 2015, sort of saying what I felt the blend could be, and it did actually work out very much like that. But of course, at the time, I was the one UKIP MEP who wasn't saying that Nigel's preferred campaign should be the designated campaign. So I think it's fair to say that my relationship with him came under a lot of strain. But I think that there were lots of people who thought that the referendum wasn't winnable, and actually what we could do was maybe get 45% of the vote and mobilize that Brexit feeling behind UKIP straight after that, and maybe forge on that way, rather like the SNP did in Scotland in 2014. But I always thought there was a chance of actually winning, and it would be a close run thing. And so for me, it was head over heart. And so I was the one who wrote, the one UKIP MEP who wrote the letter saying I supported Vote Leave for the designation. And, who knows what the outcome would have been otherwise. But, I think that decision stands the test of time.
Well, yeah, and certainly it did take some courage of convictions to stand by that, because I do recall that there was a little pressure applied.
Thumb screws and other implements were used, but it seemed like, to me, it was just do the right thing.
Yeah, well, obviously, the proof is in the proof of the pudding's in the tasting, and we won. I think actually it was a combined effort of having that somewhat.
Yeah.
I think you used the word the snooty, perhaps more middle class Vote Leave thing with the UKIP efforts going out there and mobilising working class people on the streets, and a combination of factors. I remember being on a battle bus going around the Midlands and the Northwest with Paul Nuttall and various other people, and sort of hitting the streets and dodging the eggs from time to time and things like that. But getting out there and doing it, and reaching the people who wouldn't have voted for it were it just Boris, and that kind of approach. So I think it worked, and that's the main thing.
I think it even worked that the two campaigns hated each other so much, because at one point, I'm trying to remember, I think it was Chuka Umunna was trying to say that the Vote Leave were running a UKIP campaign. Effectively, it was UKIP running a campaign, but because Nigel, etc., and Vote Leave hated each other so much that just got no traction whatsoever. And a couple of days after the referendum, I actually talked to Matthew Elliott about what got us over the line, and he did tell me one crucial thing, and I don't think he's ever said this to Nigel, was and the quote was, "We had two campaigns, they only had one." And I think it all worked almost as if preordained from someone above liking us.
Yeah, because it certainly wasn't planned that way, because the animosity was very genuine, wasn't it? You could feel that. So we got through the referendum and won, which I think you touched on, was a surprise to quite a few people. I must admit, I thought we were going to get close, but just stumbled at the finishing line. And the SNP effect that you mentioned was exactly what I thought would happen. And I thought we'd have to win battles over the next few years, probably in Westminster, to get to the point where we actually took action. But I think that came ahead of most of our predicted timescales, and caused a problem within UKIP. Because I don't think we'd expected to be where we were. And of course, Nigel's relatively sudden departure afterwards threw the whole thing into disarray, as is well noted. And the party itself, it showed the different groups of people within the party. You've got people such as myself, sort of goggle-eyed loon libertarians, as I think is a description you might concur with. And then there's more social democratic people, and then there were nationalists, and there was various different camps. And what's your sort of take on how that all unravelled, and what happened during the later stages of your stay with the party?
Well, I think to be fair, and it was widely understood in the run-up to the 2014 European Parliament elections, and then that great performance at the 2015 general election. You know, we were a political party, and every vote for us increased the likelihood of Brexit, mainly by putting indirect pressure on the Conservatives. And so my view from my input into those manifestos was, we've just got to grab popular common sense causes. So, you know, people from your wing maybe, you know, at one point I was the economic spokesman, obviously, and I was making extra spending on the NHS a really big thing, you know, and I am a fan of the NHS in the round, not saying it's perfect, but people who might have been more critical and wanting to look at more innovative ways of delivering healthcare, perhaps such as yourself, well, I think, you know, generally thought, well, the bigger cause is here. The better we do, the more we chime with more voters, the more likely we are to get the referendum. But once, as you say, the referendum was held and we'd won it, that uniting purpose was gone. And then you did look around and you think, you know, well, Bill's perhaps the senior libertarian, and there's a whole faction of them. I find myself as the sort of patriotic social democrat person, or one of them. And then, as you say, there were the more sort of down the line nationalistic, even English nationalistic elements too. And yeah, that could UKIP then evolve into a party having lost its cause célèbre and about to lose its MEPs into a party that could make it in that bear pit of two-party first past the post Westminster politics. It was always going to be very difficult, I think.
Yeah, and that is the issue, because not only did we have a cause that united us, we also had a leader in Nigel who was, you know, there was no denying that he was going to be the leader as long as he wanted to be the leader, and he was immovable. He was the sort of the strong man of the party. And when you lose both right on top of each other, and it opened up that civil war, which never got finalised. You know, during that time when we were all there, it never really ended properly, because everyone fought each other to a standstill, and we ended up with sort of compromise candidates winning who weren't from either particular wing, and didn't perhaps carry the conviction to carry things through. But there was a moment. Go on, sorry.
I was going to say, and I wanted Suzanne Evans to be the lead because I'd seen, you know, she really had connected us with some of that middle class, Middle England, perhaps more Shire vote, and I thought she could go on and broaden the party. But you know, I think various times the NEC worked out ways to say that she shouldn't even be allowed to stand for the leadership. And I think although Nigel had stood down, you know, he was by no means kind of stepping back and just allowing events to unfold and whoever got elected to be the leader. I think there was a certain element of Nigel that was looking for, quote, a seat warmer, someone who would just occupy the space until he was ready and judged the conditions propitious to return. So I think that caused the party no end of problems as well.
Well, the notorious backseat driver syndrome that a certain great lady of his admiration and mine would have done. Yeah, so we got the final part before we move on from this potted history, because it actually is very interesting, but we've got present day things to talk about as well. The final part really was when there was a chance of everyone being brought together. It was Paul Nuttall's leadership, ill-fated as it was, tenure, which was a great shame, because Paul, I think, was the last person who I thought could bring us all together by his likable personality. Basically, you know, just a genuinely nice guy who, you know, libertarians could deal with, and your side and the other side. There was a little bit of everything. I always thought with Paul that Stoke by-election came too soon.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and he wasn't ready for it temperamentally. The polling was good before it, but I think, as I recall, Article 50 got voted through the Commons by both the Tories and Labour at the beginning of the campaign. So suddenly we're into this era where everyone on paper was for Brexit, and that took away a lot of our unique selling point. And then people were looking around, well, who's got the best Brexit offer? If you've got, the Tories are the party of government and they're saying all the right things on Brexit, and equally Labour voters who might have been motivated by lots of other things, anti-poverty measures or whatever, but supported Brexit, their party was telling them, right, we're on board, we're listening. So that made it very difficult. I just think the intensity of media scrutiny and attack Paul came under, he wasn't really ready for either. And I think if you think back to the leadership, there were so many leadership contests, weren't there? But there was one, the first one, which Stephen Wolfe kind of failed to get his forms in on time, and Diane James won and was leader for about 12 days. Paul decided not to stand in that, which I thought was quite telling, that he was by no means 100%, but a couple of months later, he suddenly, in the contest, seen correctly, I think, as the unity candidate. But he was doubly unlucky. Stoke did come at the wrong time. You could say too soon, or you could say slightly too late. But then the real stroke of bad luck was Theresa May deciding to call a general election, while at the time still saying all the right things about Brexit.
Yeah, it did leave us with very little ground to cling to under the circumstances. And of course, from there, the things changed within the party. And you left. You were one of the later people, I think, to leave UKIP. Was it? Had you finished? You hadn't quite finished your term as an MEP when you left the party, had you?
Yeah. I actually wasn't. Actually, I think it was one of the early ones. I left about a week before Nigel left. I left UKIP at the very end of November 2018. Because of the then leader Gerard Batten's decision to bring Tommy Robinson and his inner circle on board, and he made, I think, Tommy Robinson an advisor on a couple of different issues. And I it certainly, and he was trying to get Tommy Robinson actually to join the party, and I'd stood in 2014 at the European elections, are very much stressing the party's rule that we don't allow people from the BNP or the EDL into our party, and we're the one party, who stresses that line, and it was too far for me, and I don't regret it at all. By then we won the referendum, we got the democratic legitimacy for Brexit. It's certainly true in 2019 that Theresa May's backpedaling and conniving became more and more clear. But I think UKIP, because of Gerard's, narrowing the appeal of the party, it was the right thing to do to leave UKIP then. And I also, don't regret the fact that I didn't join the Brexit Party a year or so. Was it? No, it would have been very shortly afterwards. In the run up to the next European elections, but I did wish them well and spoke on telly in support of them and things like that. Because again, it was a pop up for a year. It did the job. But I think given where Gerard was taking UKIP, it wasn't comfortable, and I didn't feel it was the UKIP that I joined. So in the circumstances of the big cause, having had a breakthrough, it was time to go.
Yeah, I think we can concur that. I think Gerard was rather careless. He lost more MEPs than you can possibly imagine in a very short period of time, didn't he? But anyway, we moved past him. I think it's probably best. So from there, your current sort of political favour lies with the SDP, I believe. That's still your sort of who you're supporting and where you're at.
Yeah, well, my day job is writing political commentary again for, centre-right outlets like the Daily Express, the Spectator Coffee House, Telegraph Online. But as a bit of a sideline, I still, am a member and reasonably active supporter of the SDP, which at the time I rejoined it, I think only had about 80 members nationwide and is now pushing 2,000. So it's a sort of, effectively, it is a startup, but even during the referendum campaign with only a handful of members, it was a supporter of Brexit, and it believed in the nation state as a sort of key entity that people could pledge their collective allegiance to. And you might say on the economics, slightly centre left rather than centre right. You might think very left wing, whatever. Certainly more left wing than you are, Bill, but by no means full on socialist or anything like that. And it very much reflected my priorities, and very hostile to the rise of identity politics, and silly levels of political correctness. So I thought for that my last act, really, in my last few months as an MEP, was to do what I could to bring this new option to the notice of as many people as I could. And Rod Liddle joined shortly after me, and I think we got the ball rolling. We'll see where it goes. It needs obviously a lot of money, a lot of publicity, perhaps a couple of bigger fish than I am to jump in and join.
Well, it's certainly got very active members, and I do engage with quite a few of them on social media, and they're very thoughtful people who've they're not the normal sort of crew who'll throw out a catchphrase at you or call you a name. They like to engage in debate. So there's a marked difference in that party to many of the other parties knocking around. That the people involved in it are. They take things seriously, and they have a more considered approach. I think would be a characteristic I've noticed anyway.
Thank you.
Although,
okay, I'll pass that back.
yeah, I mean, personally, I think they're great, but economically, we some distance apart.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's really just a side gig. But now for you, but I think it's probably important now we talk about some of the issues of the day before we get onto the really important things in life, like football and music later on. But there's some of the issues today. I mean, obviously we're completely dominated still by two big issues that are going on in the world. I think the link, the segue really from what we've been discussing would still be the EU and our scenario with that. And the issue with Northern Ireland and the way the Commission's been behaving lately. If you've got to give us your take on the behaviour of that, because I think it's all people like me sort of tug thump and shout and scream about it, but dissect it in more detail, if you will.
Well, I think where we've got to with Northern Ireland, it is regrettable and worrying. I hold Theresa May more to blame for it than Boris Johnson. I think by the time he got into Downing Street, she'd given undertakings to the European Commission that it was up to Britain and the UK to make sure there was never a hard border on the island of Ireland. Now, that was never our responsibility, and she threw away leverage, and we ended up, with the Northern Ireland Protocol in the withdrawal agreement, which pretty much hers and not Boris's. And Boris just simply had to get the withdrawal agreement through without this indefinite lock-in for the whole UK in the power of the Commission. And so he railroaded through an agreement which did then allow us to have, control of our destiny. But with Northern Ireland, some economists at the time said, "Oh, this is great for Northern Ireland. They've got a foot in both camps." But it turns out that the European Commission is really kind of gold plating the checks on every last thing, from packets of flower seeds. Now it was supposed to only apply to goods at active risk of being transited on into the Republic of Ireland and the European single market. But effectively, the European Commissioners, the way they've imposed the trade regulations, it's almost like a potential blockade of the route between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, or at any rate introducing a lot of friction into that, and that's bad faith. And then we see what they did with their own vaccine debacle a week or so ago, where they were the ones suddenly saying, we're going to cite this Article 16 in the protocol, which gives us the extraordinary right to impose a hard border, having been the ones who said any kind of hard border on the island of Ireland will be a betrayal of the Good Friday Agreement. So I do think unionists are absolutely right to doubt the basic good faith of the European Commission to try and make this work. And that we've now seen Michael Gove becoming more assertive about, and Boris Johnson, about how this can't go on, and there's a serious and permanent problem. So we might see the United Kingdom government in due course triggering that same Article 16 and ignoring the so-called border in the Irish Sea. there's also a democratic outlet, isn't there? That if the Northern Ireland Assembly elections, I think, are in 2024, and if there was a unionist majority elected on a platform of leaving the protocol, then both sides have acknowledged that could happen. So I think there'll be a bit of to and fro. I still think it can probably be made to work to everyone's satisfaction, but ultimately the United Kingdom is a nation, and it can't be right, and it's not good for peace in Northern Ireland either, to have unionists and loyalists feeling that their basic political identity is contradicted by the new arrangements. So it's a troubling thing, and I principally hold Theresa May and her inept negotiation stance to blame for it.
And were you sort of advising Boris Johnson, now sat at his right hand, whispering in his ear what he should be doing next? Would you be going down that Article 16 route with him?
I think I'll be doing what he's doing, which is airing the possibility. The sort of gift, in a way, of what the EU did last Friday was that they can hardly portray it as a unique and hostile act, given that they did it first. So floating the idea, setting the seeds of that in their minds, and then using the practical leverage that creates to win sensible concessions on the ground. And they're asking, aren't they, at the moment, for a 2-year extension before some of the checks are put into practice, things like that. But I think the EU needs to now demonstrate its good intentions. They're the ones who've really whose motivations are at greatest question. So I think what he's doing, the top line, is floating the idea of the nuclear button, as it were, underneath, creating the conditions for a bit of a hardball negotiation, almost Trump style, you might say.
Well, probably no bad thing in that respect. That links in really. What caused this latest flare-up was the vaccine situation. Now, one of the things that I see, obviously you've been very active discussing, is the whole lockdown scenario, where we go from here with COVID and vaccines and so on. You're of the opinion, if I read it right, that once we get a certain amount of the population vaccinated, we should open up. I mean, are you thinking completely open up, or keep tiers of restrictions in? Where do you think we go?
I think open up very quickly. I mean, the figures show, didn't they, that once you've done all the over 70s and people at clinically high vulnerability, that you've taken 88% of the mortality of COVID away. And then once you've added all the way down to 50-year-olds, the likes of you and me, then you've taken 99% of the mortality away. I think in those circumstances, suddenly going on about whatever long COVID or potential new variants, that's just not nearly a good enough reason to keep people under these conditions, which have a cumulative psychological effect on us all, as well as an economic impact. So I'm very much someone who thinks that we should be looking to open up everything. Certainly by April. I think hopefully schools at the beginning of March, shopping, retail, middle of March. I would hope by Easter, the data will justify complete opening up, and more of our age group, which we're only sort of, even at our age, sort of 1% likely to die of COVID if we get it. We're very low risk relatively. I mean, once even we're covered, just to sort of we'll be at the level of deaths that we tolerate through road traffic accidents, through seasonal flu when we get it. It would be extraordinary if we were to keep repressions on civil liberties in place in those circumstances. So yeah, I'm an early open upper, but I was a supporter of this third lockdown because we had an exit strategy, we had the vaccines, and we also had the new variant, which was, you could see the figures for hospitalizations just skyrocketing. So I think sadly it has been necessary.
Well, let me put a nightmare scenario to you, and then see how you react to it. What if mutations happen that bypass the vaccine? So we've opened up. We're into September of this year, and we see something new has come. The vaccine isn't effective against it. Would you go down the lockdown route again, or would you try and see something different? Bear in mind the damage that's been done, as you said, to mental health and the economy from what we've already done. Could we stand another lockdown?
Well, I mean, even the Brazilian variant, or there's two, aren't there, or the South African variant, where we're thinking the current vaccines are somewhat less effective. They're still pretty effective, and there's still thought to be almost 100% prevention of fatality from them. So the idea of a variant that's altogether as quote escape the vaccine, touch wood, I think is a long shot. It's not the most likely way this will be. And we're going to be in a position where the scientists can alter the cocktail of these vaccines to take account of new strains quite quickly. They think 6 to 8 weeks to reformulate to crack new strains. So I really, I would never say never, because there could be some altogether new and horrible disease mysteriously emerging from a place where the Chinese have a virology laboratory right next to a wet market, and who knows which bit it emanates from, whatever. I mean, Ebola, which struck sub-Saharan Africa a few years ago, that has a fatality rate of 50%. I don't think anyone was arguing against lockdowns there. So we've had something which seems to be across the piece a sort of 0.5% killer. But if it's very infectious and it sweeps through your whole country, that can still, as we've sadly seen, produce huge numbers of deaths and absolutely alarming numbers of hospitalizations. So I just think you have to judge the situation. Touch wood, that's not going to happen. And to lock down again in autumn, winter, after having spent a massive chunk of the previous 12-18 months locked down, I think it would need to be an extraordinarily dangerous new thing.
Were it Ebola, I would be the biggest fan of lockdowns that you've ever met. I can assure you that there wouldn't be an argument going on at all. Very, very briefly, if I can sort of ask you to encapsulate briefly, because I do want to get in some more questions about other things before we finish. But economically, how do you think the approach should be to recover? Now, let's assume that everything's gone as you've suggested, and then by the summer we're back up and running. We're in this huge debt that's being built up, the deficits off the scale, unemployment, etc., etc. Where do we go? How do we improve this country's economy?
I think it's loads of different things. We are going to have to do some sharpening of incentives. I don't think big early tax rises on the productive parts of the economy and on wealth creators are a good idea. I doubt that Rishi Sunak thinks that either. I mean, the extraordinary thing is we've built the national debt up to the enormous levels we have, and the national debt and the annual deficit is running at pushing 400 billion pounds. And I'm looking back at all the years of austerity and Tories accusing Labour of having a magic money tree, when Labour was actually, although it was sort of off beam at the time, planning levels of borrowing which were a whole lot less than that. So the worry is, and particularly for your wing on economics, that we have kind of been unveiled that there was a magic money tree, and this is the government's ability to print money in a deflationary context. So without causing massive price inflation, printing money and effectively giving it to itself, which again, in effect, from a purist monetarist perspective, could be seen as thieving property from people. Because if you have a certain amount of money in your society and a certain amount of assets, then if you have £1,000, that's your share of real assets too. But if the government creates itself thousands of extra quid, suddenly you own a bit less of the overall piece. So it's a bit like these companies that do rights issues without compensating existing stockholders. So that's going to be an issue that the people right of centre on economics are going to struggle with. Have we opened the doors to many years of quite socialist economics ahead? And I suppose a lot of that will depend on whether markets continue to be calm about the level of debt that the government is in. I mean, I think perhaps there should be some kind of bonds, long-term bonds issued to sort of separate the COVID debt from the rest of the national debt that's paid for quite gradually. But if I was in Rishi Sunak's shoes, I wouldn't be banking on 70% popularity ratings a year or 18 months down the line, because I think he's probably going to have to. Boris has already said he doesn't want public spending cuts effectively, or maybe a bit on foreign aid, but nothing that's going to make a material difference. And the pressure not to have too many tax rises and to get borrowing down, you've got to try and find a way of increasing growth, and you can do that. Boris is very good at talking up confidence. The trade deals signed with the sunrise parts of the world economy have got to be good news. To be honest, I would start talking up a bit of a Buy British campaign as well. Now we're effectively allowed to, and I certainly think public sector procurement should lean towards British jobs and British suppliers where the quality is there. But it's going to be a long haul, no doubt about it whatsoever. And hopefully the Tories will pull off the trick of making people think we're on the brink for how much we can borrow and we need to step back, rather than letting them think, oh, well, look, there are no limits. If the Tories can spend X, why shouldn't Labour spend X plus Y? But, that's all to be decided in probably the 2 years ahead.
Absolutely. Last few minutes. Right, let's get on to the juicy stuff. West Ham United and the Jam. Two of your favourite things in life. Well, you must be pretty pleased with West Ham at the moment, the way you're going on.
Well, you see, my childhood team is Cambridge United. West Ham was something that I adopted about 10 years ago with my son after Cambridge were non-league at the time. And I'd taken him to 2 playoff finals in succession that Cambridge were in, and we were favourites to win them both. And I think we had 1 shot on goal across the 2 matches. And he said, "Look, I don't want to do this anymore." So I looked around for, because we live in London, what can we do? And West Ham had no season ticket queue. They were the quote won the '66 World Cup sort of team, bit of an underdog. So I like that. So yeah, I've over the last decade become quite passionate about West Ham. But I bailed out of being a season ticket holder there, not because of the lockdown, but because of the taking the knee issue. And to be honest, the VAR, which has been in for a couple of seasons, I thought was an insult to fans who'd actually gone along to the stadium. It's all right to have a laugh about offside with your mates if you're sitting on your sofa having a beer. But if you're in the stadium and you've celebrated a goal and then you have to wait 3 minutes to find out it's not a goal, I mean, that to me is the tail wagging the dog. That's the telly audience being favoured over real fans. So that combination of the VAR and taking a knee and that imposition of identity politics on football meant I've bailed out of being a season ticket holder anyway, and I certainly won't go back while they're still taking a knee.
Yeah, well, I think VAR has taken the joy out of football for me. Particularly the number of decisions that went against the Wolves last season. Even some of our players have actually said they won't celebrate until the ball's being kicked off now, because they're not sure if it's going to stand. It's such a shame. And as for taking the knee, well, I think we can assume that we're both on the same page on that one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very quickly then, the music. I've tried over the years we've known each other to persuade you to classic rock and Deep Purple and Black Sabbath, but you keep sticking to the Jam. I can't understand it.
Well, I think the Black Country has got a particular role in the history of heavy rock, hasn't it, and heavy metal, and you seem to have a lot of the top bands down the years. But to me, the Jam growing up was like, being struck by lightning, seeing them, everything about them, from a great sort of poet of the age. And I know I'm not on his page on politics. I think Paul Weller was a Corbyn fan when Corbyn was the leader of the Labour Party. Almost certainly would have been strongly anti-Brexit. But in terms of sort of documenting ordinary life, and there are 3 working class boys from secondary modern school. I just think they're the peerless band of my age, and actually in UKIP, a lot of UKIPers are old Jam fans, and a few of us go when live music is allowed again. We'll be going again to see From the Jam, which is Bruce Foxton's. It's not a tribute band, because after all, he was part of the Jam, and at one point Rick Buckler was in it too. But anyway, we go and see From the Jam, which is Bruce Fox and a couple of other guys recreating the Jam sound and songs, and it's mainly sort of slightly pot-bellied blokes who look like me jumping up and down making idiots of themselves, but we have a hell of a good time. So that is one of my abiding passions.
Well, I'm not going to give up on you. I'm still going to bombard you with the occasional bit of heavy metal just to see if I can turn you around to my cause. I think I've got more chance with the music than the libertarianism. But I just want to say thanks, Patrick, for coming on the show. Really have enjoyed it, and I think it's been an interesting conversation. I'm sure that when people get to share this round, they'll learn a few things and find it fascinating, some of the views you've expressed. So, genuinely from myself, I want to thank you very much for coming on.
Great stuff, and let's hopefully get a beer on the anniversary of Brexit Day on June the 23rd. Hopefully we'll all be allowed to celebrate, cuddle each other grotesquely, and celebrate what everyone achieved.
Sounds bloody good to me, mate. Right, our time is up. Once again, thank you very much from me, Bill Etheridge, and to Patrick O'Flynn. Everyone who's watched this, please do share it around. Please do subscribe to the Open Dialogus YouTube channel. Help us keep these things going. And from head to head, it's thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.